What do you do when your girlfriend uninvites you from Christmas for her ex, after you already bought her dream gift and planned a surprise? My name is Rey Hale, and I work nights in a hospital lab where lies don't last long once the numbers come back. Christmas was supposed to be simple this year because I made it simple. I picked up extra shifts in early December, skipped my brother's weekend trip, and swallowed a few tired arguments with my girlfriend Tessa because I had a plan. Not a big showy plan, not one of those social media boyfriend stunts. A quiet plan, the kind that feels like a private promise. I was going to surprise her at her parents' place on Christmas Eve after my shift, walk in with the one gift she'd mentioned exactly once, and watch her face do that soft change from stress to relief. That was the whole point. I didn't need applause. I needed proof we were real. Tessa had been talking about the gift since late summer, in that casual way people talk when they're trying not to want something too badly. A vintage bracelet from a small jeweler downtown, the kind that didn't look flashy in photos but looked expensive in real life. She'd shown me a picture one night while we ate takeout on the couch, her thumb hovering over the screen as if she was afraid to admit how much she liked it. She'd said it was ridiculous, that she'd never buy it for herself, then she'd laughed and changed the subject. But I remembered the shop name, the metalwork pattern, the way her eyes held on it half a second longer than she meant. So I bought it. I didn't tell her. I didn't even tell my friends. I kept the receipt in my work bag, tucked behind my extra gloves and the protein bar I never ate. I asked my charge nurse for Christmas Eve coverage with a calm smile, like I didn't care either way, and she nodded because night shift people understand what it costs to ask for a favor. I rented a small car so I wouldn't show up in my beat-up sedan that smelled faintly of disinfectant. I even picked up a bottle of her mother's favorite wine because I wanted the night to start with warmth, not awkwardness. Then, 2 days before Christmas, Tessa texted me like she was canceling a haircut. "Don't come to Christmas, my ex will be there, and I want to catch up." That was it. No apology, no explanation, no, "we'll do our own thing later." Just a disinvite, clean and cold, like she was closing a tab. I stared at the message long enough that the typing indicator would have popped up if I'd been touching the screen, but I wasn't. My phone sat on the kitchen counter while I stood there holding a mug of coffee that had already gone bitter. In the background, my dishwasher hummed like nothing had happened. The world didn't react. Only my chest did. I read it again, slower this time, like tone might change if I gave it enough attention. It didn't. It was still her voice, but flatter than usual, as if someone else had helped her write it. Tessa had a habit when she was being influenced. Her sentences got shorter, and she stopped using my name. Her Ray disappeared when she wanted distance. I didn't answer right away. I looked around the apartment, our apartment, the one I'd moved into carefully piece by piece like I was building a small, safe place. Her slippers by the couch, her tote bag on the chair, the little bowl on the shelf where she tossed her earrings, her hoodie hanging over the back of the kitchen chair, the one she stole from me and never returned. Then I did the dumbest thing, the thing people do when they're trying to save a feeling. I opened our message thread and scrolled up, looking for context that didn't exist. There were holiday emojis from her 2 days ago. There was a link to a cinnamon roll recipe. There was a "miss you" at 2 a.m. last week. And now this. "Don't come to Christmas. My ex will be there. I want to catch up." 3 sentences, like 3 steps down into a hole. I finally typed one line. Not angry, not pleading, just basic reality. I already planned to come. I took a shift swap. I bought gifts. Her response came fast, too fast. "I didn't ask you to. Please don't make this a thing. Don't make this a thing." As if Christmas wasn't already a thing. As if being told to stay away while her ex sat at her family table wasn't a thing. As if my surprise gift wasn't sitting wrapped in a drawer like an idiot's faith. I could feel a heat rise in my face, the kind that precedes words you regret, and I stopped it the way I stop bad impulses at work. In toxicology, when something's contaminated, you don't argue with it. You isolate it, you label it, you move on. So I didn't argue. I didn't ask why. I didn't ask how long catch-up would last. I didn't ask whether I was supposed to wait outside like a delivery driver while they had closure by candlelight. I simply set the phone down and went very still. In the quiet, I realized something that hurt worse than the disinvite. She wasn't afraid of my reaction. She was confident I'd swallow it. Her tone wasn't nervous. It was managerial. Like she was updating a schedule. That's when the plan changed. Not into a fight, into an exit. I went to the drawer in the bedroom where I'd hidden the bracelet, still in its small box, still wrapped in the shop's soft paper. I held it in my palm and felt the weight of it, too light to match what it suddenly represented. I didn't open it. I didn't let myself imagine her smile. I put it back in the box, put the box in my jacket pocket, and walked out to the car. The jeweler was still open, busy with last-minute buyers. I stood in line behind a man holding a necklace and a woman holding earrings, both of them looking tired but hopeful. When it was my turn, the clerk smiled at me and asked if I was excited. I said I needed to return something. Her smile faded just a fraction, the way people's faces change when they see disappointment up close. She didn't ask why. She scanned the receipt, checked the box, and processed it like any other transaction. The money returned to my card with a soft beep. A clean reversal. A small mercy. Outside, the air smelled like winter and car exhaust. I sat in my driver's seat with my hands on the wheel and felt my body try to talk me out of what I'd already decided. It tried to bargain. Maybe she's stressed. Maybe her ex is just passing through town. Maybe this is family pressure. Maybe she'll regret it and you'll look dramatic. Then I remembered her second message. Please don't make this a thing. She'd already decided what I was allowed to feel. So I went home and started packing. Not theatrically, not slamming drawers, not throwing her stuff in a box. Quiet, deliberate, like I was checking out of a hotel where the room had become unsafe. I took my work scrubs, my extra shoes, my laptop, my charger, my documents. I left anything that belonged to us because the word us had just been demoted without discussion. As I packed, I noticed how much of my life had been placed around hers, as if I'd been building a perimeter instead of a partnership. My coat hung behind her coat. My toothbrush sat beside hers. My cereal was pushed to the back of the pantry because she liked her snacks up front. Small compromises, normal on their own, but suddenly they looked like a pattern. A life slowly rearranged to make room for someone who could remove me with a text. I wrote a short note and left it on the kitchen counter. One sentence. I won't compete with your past. I'm gone. No insults, no begging, no threats. Just a boundary made physical. Then I took my keys off the ring, left the spare on the counter, and walked out with one suitcase and a duffel bag. I didn't go to a friend's place. Friends ask questions, friends offer opinions. I didn't want noise. I rented a small, bland room near the hospital, the kind of place built for people who pass through without leaving stories behind. The lobby smelled like cheap pine cleaner. The bedspread had a pattern designed to hide stains. It was perfect. That night, I went to my shift like nothing had happened. That part was almost easy. Hospitals don't care about your heartbreak. The specimens kept coming. The machines kept humming. The nurses kept asking for quick turnaround times. My hands moved the way they always moved, steady and practiced, while my mind tried to replay Tessa's message like a recording stuck on loop. Around 3 a.m, my phone buzzed. I didn't check it until I was off the floor. When I finally looked, there were 4 missed calls from Tessa and a string of messages that tightened the muscles along my jaw. Where are you, Ray? Please, stop doing this. Answer me. She didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't ask what she'd done. She demanded an answer like I was an employee who'd missed a meeting. That told me everything I needed to know about the kind of apology she was capable of. I didn't respond. At the end of my shift, I sat in my car in the employee lot while the sky went pale and thin. The world looked like it always did after a night shift. Drained, quiet, slightly unreal. I drove back to the motel, slept for a few hours, woke up to more missed calls, and ignored them again. On Christmas Eve, I watched the afternoon light crawl across the motel wall and thought about how I was supposed to be at her parents' house right now, gift in hand, surprise smile ready, playing the role she'd written for me. I pictured her family table, the place settings, her mother's wine glasses, the tree. Then I pictured the ex sitting there, relaxed, welcomed, as if he belonged. The thought didn't make me jealous, it made me feel replaced. By late morning on Christmas Day, my phone rang again. This time, I answered. Not because I wanted to comfort her, because I wanted to hear her voice when it wasn't rehearsed. She sounded wrecked, breath uneven, words catching. Ray, I didn't mean, Her voice cracked, and she started crying in that ugly, sincere way people cry when a plan backfires and the consequences finally land. The word came out like the beginning of because, but it also sounded like the beginning of something else. Something more desperate, like she was reaching for a reason that would make her look less guilty. Then she stopped, abruptly, as if someone had walked into the room with her. The crying cut off mid-breath. I heard a muffled sound in the background, not clear enough to identify, but sharp enough to feel like someone else is here. And in that sudden silence, I realized the call wasn't just her reaching out. It was a test. Someone wanted to know if I'd come running. When Tessa's voice cut off mid-cry, it hit the same part of my brain that notices a monitor go flat for half a second before anyone else looks up. It wasn't just that she stopped talking. It was how fast she stopped, like a hand had gone up in front of her mouth. like someone had stepped into the room and she'd switched from emotion to obedience. I didn't fill the silence for her. "Tessa," I said, calm, "are you alone?" A pause. Too long. Then a small, strained inhale. "Yeah, I mean..." Another pause, and then a softer voice, like she was trying to sound normal. "It's loud here." Loud where? She didn't say, because if she said it, the lie would have edges. Lies hate edges. I kept my voice even. "You told me not to come." "I know," she whispered, and there was a tremor in it that sounded less like regret and more like fear. "I didn't think you'd actually leave." There it was. The confession that wasn't meant to be one. She didn't think I'd leave. She thought I'd wait outside her life until she decided to unlock the door again. She thought Christmas was a pause button she could press on me. Yeah, I watched the motel ceiling while she breathed into the phone. I could picture her exactly, hunched in some corner, wiping her cheeks, trying to force her voice into something that sounded like the Tessa who deserved forgiveness. But the version of her who texted me, "Don't come," had already spoken louder than tears. "What happened?" I asked. She started again. "He showed up, and it was supposed to be quick, just coffee. And my mom said it would be nice if he came for dinner, and then it got complicated." Her words came in a rush, like if she talked fast enough, she could outrun blame. "He kept bringing up old stuff, and I didn't want to fight, and you're always so intense about him, so I thought, just one night, just Christmas, and then you and I." "And then you and I what?" I asked. "Do our own holiday after you're done catching up?" Silence. She knew how it sounded now. She had heard it out loud. She swallowed. "I didn't want drama." "That wasn't avoiding drama," I said. "That was choosing it and assigning it to me." Her breath hitched again. "Ray, please. I messed up. I know I did. But you leaving like that. Everyone's asking where you are. He's asking where you are. My mom keeps looking at the door like you're going to walk in any second, and..." Her voice cracked. "I didn't think you'd make me look like this. Make me look like this." Even now, in the middle of crying, her focus snapped back to optics. I closed my eyes and let that sentence settle. The night nurse part of me wanted to triage, stabilize, reduce panic. But the man part of me heard what mattered. She didn't miss me. She missed control. "What do you want?" I asked. "I want you to come," she said quickly, like she'd been waiting for the question. "Please, just come. We can talk. We can fix it. I'll tell him to leave, I swear. I cut her off gently. "No." Her breathing stopped like she'd been slapped. "No?" "You told me not to come," I said. "So I didn't. That was the boundary you set." "But I didn't mean it like that," she whispered, and now her voice had that desperate, bargaining edge. "I didn't mean... I just needed one night." "One night was enough," I said. Another pause, and then her tone changed. Not fully, but enough to notice. "So you're just... done?" I didn't answer immediately, because the word "done" was the one she'd used on me through a text, like a switch. I wasn't going to mirror her cruelty. I was going to end this clean. "I returned the gift," I said. Her inhale was sharp. "What?" "I returned it," I repeated. "I packed. I left." The silence that followed felt like a room going cold. I could almost see her face, not grief yet, but shock. Because the dream gift wasn't just an object. It was proof I'd listened, proof I'd invested, proof she'd been wrong about how replaceable I was. "Why would you do that?" she demanded, and the demand came out before the sadness could. That's so petty." "Petty." The word landed and made something in me go still. "Tessa," I said very quietly, "you disinvited me from Christmas so you could catch up with your ex. After I planned a surprise, after I arranged my shifts, after I spent money I didn't need to spend, and you're calling me petty." Her breath stuttered. "I'm sorry, okay? I'm sorry. He's been pressuring me." Pressuring, that word. That word had weight. "How?" I asked. She hesitated. I heard movement on her end, like she'd turned her head away from someone. Then she whispered, "He knows things. He keeps saying if I don't talk to him, he'll make it hard for me at work." There it was. Not romance. Leverage. Tessa worked in a clinic network. Admin side, scheduling, referrals. Her ex, Mason Rourke, was a surgeon with enough pull to ruin someone quietly. I didn't know the details yet, but I knew the type. In healthcare, power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just reroutes. Sometimes it delays. Sometimes it denies. "Did he say that in writing?" I asked. "No," she said quickly. "No, never. He's not stupid." Another signal. She wasn't crying because she missed me. She was crying because her safety net had walked out, and now she was alone with the person who actually controlled her. I looked down at my hands. They were steady. That steadiness wasn't cruelty. It was clarity. "Tessa," I said, "listen to me. I'm not coming." "But I'm not your shield," I continued, "and I'm not going to stand in a room and pretend everything is fine while you manage his moods." Her breathing turned ragged again, but behind it I caught something else. A faint murmur, a male voice in the background, low and close. It was distant, but it was there. Someone was in the room, or just outside it, or close enough that she could feel him. "Tessa," I said again, "who is with you?" She didn't answer. Her silence was the answer. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten. I did the one thing that makes controlling people nervous. "I'm going to text you one number," I said. "If you feel unsafe, you call it, not me." "What number?" she whispered. "My attorney," I lied smoothly, because the truth was worse for her in that moment. The truth was, I wasn't going to be dragged back into their triangle through my sympathy. I was going to step out and let reality hit the floor. She started to speak again. "Ray, please, because..." And then the same abrupt cut happened, sharper this time, like a hand had grabbed the phone. The line went dead. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then placed the phone face down on the bed and sat in the quiet, listening to my own breathing. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt confirmed. The call hadn't been a reconciliation attempt. It had been a leverage check, to see if I would return and play the role of the calm boyfriend in front of Mason, to see if I would be absorbed back into their dynamic like a piece of furniture. I stood up, put on my jacket, and walked out into the cold. Because the next part wasn't about saving Tessa, it was about figuring out why a surgeon needed her this badly, on Christmas, when he supposedly only wanted to catch up. I didn't go back to the motel room after that call ended. I drove to the hospital on autopilot, parked in the employee lot, and sat with the engine off while the building's windows glowed against the winter dark like a ship that never sleeps. Night shift people learn to live in two worlds at once. The normal world that posts holiday photos and eats dinner at reasonable hours, and the clinical world where blood, urine, and paperwork keep arriving no matter what day it is. I belonged to the second world, and if Mason Rourke needed Tessa on Christmas, it wasn't because he missed her. It was because he needed his first world to stay intact while his second world stayed hidden. In my experience, that kind of need usually starts with one of two things: money or fear. I walked through the staff entrance, nodded to security, and kept my head down. I didn't want questions. I didn't want sympathy. I wanted quiet, because quiet is where patterns show themselves. In the lab, the air smelled like disinfectant and warm plastic. Centrifuges whirred. Analyzer screens blinked. A couple of techs were eating stale cookies from a break room tin, laughing softly like they were trying to convince themselves it was still Christmas. I hung my coat, washed my hands, and pulled on gloves with the same ritual calm I'd been using to keep my personal life from bleeding into my work life. Then I did something I'd never done before. I opened my phone and exported my dating app data. It wasn't revenge. It was control. The app had been where Tessa and I started, and it had become the place she used to keep her social proof clean, little messages to friends, saved photos, reminders, memories. Most people treat it like a toy. I treated it like a record. When you export, you don't just get the sweet messages. You get timestamps, you get edits, you get patterns of silence that line up with other events. You get a 6-month map of what was really happening while you were living inside it. I didn't post it publicly. I didn't blast it to strangers. I sent a curated set of screenshots to one person, Nia Calder, a mutual friend who sat at the center of our social circle like a quiet switchboard. Nia wasn't dramatic. Nia didn't gossip for fun, but Nia hated being manipulated, and Tessa's sudden disinvite had rippled through the friend group already. People were confused. Confusion is where Mason would thrive. I didn't want confusion. I wanted a shared baseline. So I sent Nia 3 things, nothing more. Tessa's "don't come" text, the follow-up, "please don't make this a thing," and a timeline strip of earlier messages over 6 months where Mason's name surfaced in the same pattern every time: Tessa going cold, canceling plans, work emergencies, then returning affectionate once the catch-up was done. I added one line. "Not asking you to take sides. I'm just not letting this get rewritten." Nia read it. Her typing bubble appeared, stopped, appeared again, then disappeared. Finally, she sent one message back. I knew he was still in her head. I didn't know he was still in her life. That was enough. The group would stop treating my exit like a tantrum and start treating it like a boundary. Then I put my phone away and stepped back into my role, because the lab doesn't care about your heartbreak, and I needed my mind sharp. If Mason was using leverage, I had to see what kind, and the only place I could ethically see anything was in the spaces I was authorized to touch. That's what people don't understand about hospital access. It's not a magic key to anyone's secrets. It's narrow lanes, audited clicks, and rules that can end your career if you try to play hero. I wasn't going to break rules. I didn't need to. The kind of abuse Mason was capable of didn't hide in private diaries. It hid in systems, and systems leave footprints even when you're careful. Around 1 a.m., the ER sent up a stat tox screen. Standard. I processed it. Another came in, then another, all from the same outpatient clinic attached to the hospital network. That part wasn't standard. Outpatient clinics don't usually generate a cluster of late-night stat tox screens on Christmas. They also don't usually route them through us unless there's a compliance reason, a chain of custody requirement, or a flagged provider. My hand slowed slightly as I read the ordering provider's name on the requisition. Mason Rourke. It wasn't a surprise, not after the way Tessa's call had cut off, but the timing felt like a door opening in a hallway I hadn't known existed. 3 samples, all listed as post-op pain management follow-ups, all marked urgent. I checked the specimen routing barcode stickers, the little black and white labels that track where a sample goes, who touches it, and when. The barcodes were valid, but the routing path was odd. Each one had been reprinted. Reprints happen when a label smears or falls off. But 3 reprints in a cluster from the same clinic on the same night is the kind of coincidence that makes my skin tighten. I didn't jump to conclusions. I did what I always do. I documented what was in front of me. I wrote down the accession numbers and the reprint flags in my personal notebook. The one I used for shift details, not protected health information, just operational anomalies that I could later report through proper channels if they became a pattern. Then I ran the tests. 2 came back clean enough. 1 came back strange. Not criminal strange, not headline strange. Just clinically inconsistent with what the chart note summary indicated on the lab order. The order said routine post-op meds. The tox results suggested exposure that didn't match the listed prescriptions. That could mean a lot of things: miscommunication, patient noncompliance, false positives, even lab error. But it also could mean someone was trying to shape outcomes by choosing what samples got tested, when, and how. I pulled the quality control logs. Everything was within range. I reran the sample. Same result. I asked a colleague to double-check my interpretation without telling them my personal context. They agreed it was inconsistent and worth flagging for clinician follow-up, so I flagged it through the standard workflow. No accusations, just result inconsistent with listed medications, recommend clinical correlation. The system logged my note. That mattered. If anyone tried to bury it later, the audit trail would show it existed. When my shift calmed, I walked to the narcotics processing area, not because I wanted to snoop, but because my job includes periodic reconciliation support when tox results intersect with controlled substances. Hospitals don't like diversion. Hospitals fear diversion the way people fear fire, not because it's dramatic, but because it spreads quietly and destroys everything. There was a standard count sheet on the clipboard for controlled meds used in the lab's small emergency supply. I wasn't responsible for pharmacy inventory, but I was trained to notice discrepancies and report them. That night, there was a discrepancy. 1 vial count didn't match the log entries. It was off by 1. Not a lot, just enough to be explained away by a sloppy mark or a late entry. But I'd learned something working toxicology. Diversion often starts small because small feels forgivable. Small feels like nobody will care. Small is where people practice. I checked the last signatures. 1 name popped up more than once on the handoff chain because it involved clinic transfers for samples that needed controlled substance correlation. That name wasn't Mason's. It was an RN liaison from Mason's clinic, someone whose job was to courier and coordinate. The signature style was consistent. The timestamps were tight, too tight. I didn't accuse the RN in my head. Diversion networks rarely run on one person. They run on pressure and permission. I wrote down the discrepancy as a shift note. Not patient info, not a claim, just controlled inventory sheet discrepancy observed. Follow standard reporting. Then I did exactly that. I submitted a neutral internal incident report through compliance, the kind that triggers a routine review without pointing fingers. Hospitals love routine reviews. Routine reviews are harder for powerful people to block because they don't look personal. They look procedural. If Mason had influence, I wanted to avoid giving him a single obvious target. At 4 a.m., my phone buzzed again. A text from Nia. Tessa's ex is at her family dinner. He's been talking to her in the kitchen all night. Her mom thinks it's romantic. It isn't. Under that, another line. Tessa keeps looking at her phone like she's waiting for you. She's not okay. I read it, felt the old instinct to run in and rescue, and crushed it back down. If Mason's leverage was work-related, me showing up would only feed the story he wanted. Jealous boyfriend, unstable, controlling. The best rescue I could offer was making sure Mason's leverage didn't survive scrutiny. At 6 a.m., as the sky began to lighten, I saw Mason's name again, this time in an internal message queue related to clinic lab routing. The clinic had requested a rush chain of custody confirmation for specimens. Again, unusual for post-op follow-ups. Chain of custody isn't used to soothe patients. It's used when someone anticipates disputes, investigations, or legal exposure. My throat went dry, not from fear, but from recognition. Mason wasn't just pressuring Tessa. He was managing risk. I printed the chain of custody confirmation page for lab records, as allowed, and placed it in the proper file. Then I logged the fact that the clinic requested it in my shift notebook. If compliance asked later, I could point to the standard record and my standard note. Everything above board, everything boring. When my shift ended, I didn't go to sleep. I sat in my car with the heater running and wrote a timeline on a blank page. Tessa disinvites me. Mason present. Tessa call cuts off twice. Overnight, Mason's clinic sends unusual tox screens and chain of custody requests. Narcotic count discrepancy appears. None of it proved a crime yet, but it did prove alignment. It did prove that the personal and the professional were connected, and that Mason's presence in Tessa's life wasn't nostalgia. It was containment. I checked my phone and found a new message request from Tessa. Not a call this time. A text, short and shaky. Please tell me you're safe. He's saying things. I stared at it for a long moment. There it was again, the vague language that hides specific threats. He's saying things. That could mean he misses me, or it could mean he's going to ruin my job, or it could mean something worse. He knows what you know. I replied with one line. I'm safe. Are you? No apology. No reconciliation bait. Just a check. Her response came after a pause. I can't talk. He's watching. And then, he said you think you're smarter than him. That line made my stomach tighten. Mason had noticed me. Mason had formed a narrative about me without ever speaking to me. That meant someone had been feeding him information. Either Tessa in moments of fear, or someone at the clinic, or both. And if Mason was smart, he'd already be thinking about how to neutralize the person who might become a problem. I finally slept for 3 hours, then woke up to another message from Nia. People are asking why you left. I told them you were disinvited. Tessa is spiraling. Her mom is blaming you. Mason is acting calm. Nia added one more line. Calm men scare me more than angry ones. Mine too. That afternoon, I went back to the hospital, not on shift, but as myself, walking into administration with a calm face and a folder that contained only what I was allowed to bring. My own written notes about operational anomalies, the incident report confirmation number, and a request to speak with compliance about a potential controlled substance discrepancy. I didn't mention Mason's name at first. I didn't mention Tessa. I framed it as what it was. I observed irregularities that deserved review. The compliance officer who met with me was tired because it was a holiday week, but her eyes sharpened when I described the cluster of unusual clinic requests and the inventory mismatch. She asked if I had proof. I told her the system logs existed and the incident report would point to the appropriate records. I told her I wanted the matter handled through standard review, with auditing, not gossip. She nodded. That nod was another small piece of relief. Because once compliance touches something, it stops being personal. It becomes institutional. Institutions move slowly, but when they move, they crush. As I walked out, my phone buzzed again, a call from Tessa. I let it ring twice, then answered, because I wanted to hear if her voice still sounded like fear, or if it had shifted into rehearsed damage control. She whispered, Ray, he found out you work tox. My hand tightened on the phone. He always knew I worked in the lab. No, she said, trembling. He found out what you look at. He said he knows people. He said if you keep digging, he'll make you disappear from the hospital. He said you're just a night nurse with a god complex. Her breath hitched. I didn't tell him you filed anything, I swear. I closed my eyes. The threat wasn't a threat of violence. It was a threat of erasure. Professional erasure. The kind that destroys you quietly while everyone else keeps eating dinner. Tessa, I said, low and steady, listen carefully. Do not warn him about anything. Do not mention me to him. If he asks, you tell him you haven't spoken to me. I paused, then added the line that mattered. And if he pressures you again, write down exactly what he says. Dates, times, nothing emotional, facts. She started crying again. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm not the person you need to apologize to right now, I said. You need to stay safe. There was a soft sound in the background. Footsteps, close, and then a male voice, faint but clear enough to cut through the line. Who are you talking to, Tess? Her breathing stopped. The call didn't end this time. It stayed open, dead air and muffled movement, as if the phone had been lowered but not hung up. I could hear her swallow. I could hear the faint clink of glass. I could hear Mason's voice again, closer now, smooth and amused. Tell him, Mason said. Merry Christmas. Then the line went silent for one beat, and my screen lit with a new notification from the hospital's secure messaging system. A clinician inquiry had been placed, requesting that my lab rerun a specific tox sample and correct any inconsistencies before formal review. The requesting provider name on the message was Mason Rourke, and in that moment, with Tessa's open line still breathing quietly in my ear, I understood the next move wasn't going to be a threat. It was going to be a cleanup. The message from Mason sat in the secure system like a polite knife. Rerun the sample and correct any inconsistencies before formal review. He hadn't written, change it. He hadn't written, fix it. He'd written it the way powerful clinicians write when they want deniability baked into the sentence, the way they phrase pressure as quality control. But I knew the difference between a legitimate request and a preemptive cleanup, because legitimate requests come with specifics. Which method, which analyte, which concern. This was vague on purpose, and vagueness is a shield. I didn't answer through the system right away. I took a screenshot of the request header with the timestamp, then I logged out and walked straight to my supervisor's office, the one place in the lab where the door closed and the fluorescent hum felt slightly less loud. My supervisor, Marin, was an older tech with the kind of calm you only get after a decade of dealing with people who think titles let them rewrite chemistry. She looked up from her screen as I knocked, and I saw her eyes register the fact that I was off shift and still in my work jacket. What's wrong? She asked, not unkindly, just directly. I held my phone out with the secure message visible. I got this, I said. From Mason Rourke. He's requesting a rerun and asking us to correct inconsistencies before formal review. Marin's mouth tightened. She read it twice, and her eyes flicked to me. Did you already flag the result? Yes, I said. Standard note. Clinical correlation recommended. Nothing accusatory. And QC? Within range, I said. I reran it once already. Same result. Marin leaned back slightly and exhaled through her nose. Okay, she said. Good. You didn't respond. That's good. She opened the lab's internal protocol page on her computer without me asking, the way people do when they've seen the shape of a problem before and want the answer ready before the problem speaks. We don't correct anything, she said calmly. We verify. If the result is accurate, it stands. If there's an error, we document the error and correct with an amended report. We do not do private reruns because a provider is nervous. I felt a small release in my chest. Not relief, exactly. More like confirmation that I wasn't alone in seeing the tactic. Marin tapped her pen against the desk. We do a supervised confirmatory rerun, she said. Chain of custody intact. 2 tech sign off. I'll pull the specimen from storage with you. We'll document every step, and I'll respond in the system, not you. Thank you, I said, and meant it. In this kind of situation, the difference between he said, she said, and lab protocol is everything. We walked to specimen storage together. Freezer air hit my face as we opened the door, and rows of labeled containers stared back like quiet little witnesses. Marin pulled the sample by accession number, checked the barcode, and handed it to me with gloved hands while she read the chain of custody log out loud, confirming every timestamp and handler. It felt absurdly ceremonial, but ceremony exists for a reason. It turns moments like this into records instead of whispers. In the testing area, we ran the confirmatory process exactly as protocol dictated. 2 of us present. Documented method. Controls verified. No improvisation. When the result printed, it matched the prior runs. The same inconsistency with the listed meds. The same flags that warranted clinical correlation. Nothing corrected. Nothing softened. Just chemistry, indifferent to Mason's ego. Marin stared at the printout for a long moment. Then she picked up the phone and called the lab director. Not a casual call, not a, hey, by the way, a formal escalation. I listened to her side of the conversation as she summarized the facts in clean language. Repeated inconsistent tox result, provider requesting correction, supervised rerun confirms original, concern for attempted undue influence, compliance report already filed regarding unrelated controlled inventory discrepancy. The lab director's voice wasn't audible, but I could hear Marin's responses. Yes, logged, yes, documented, yes, ready to forward. When she hung up, she looked at me in that steady way people look when they're deciding whether you can handle what comes next. "You said you filed a compliance report," she said. "Yes," I answered. "About the count sheet discrepancy," she clarified. "Yes." Marin nodded once, slow. "Okay. You're going to add an addendum," she said. "Not to the patient report, to the internal incident trail. You're going to note that the ordering provider requested a correction and that we performed a supervised confirmatory rerun with identical results. Purely factual." "And then?" I asked. "And then we let compliance handle the provider behavior," she said. "We do not argue with surgeons. We do not get into phone calls. We do not accept friendly side conversations. We give compliance a clean package and we step back." I wanted to say Mason would not step back. I wanted to say he'd already inserted himself into my personal life through Tessa, that his pressure wasn't limited to lab messaging. But I didn't say it. Not yet. Personal context could make me look biased. Compliance doesn't respond to emotion. It responds to pattern. So I wrote the addendum exactly the way Marin instructed. Date, time, provider message received, supervised rerun performed under protocol, result confirmed, lab director notified, no adjectives, no accusations. Then I handed it to Marin to countersign as witness. The moment I hit submit, the system time-stamped my note, and something in my mind clicked into place. Mason could pressure people verbally. He could manipulate in kitchens. He could threaten careers in whispers. But he couldn't erase timestamps without leaving evidence of erasure. And that meant the fight wasn't going to be fought in voices. It was going to be fought in audit trails. I went back to the break room, sat down, and finally listened to the voice note Tessa had sent earlier. The one I'd saved without opening. I did it with my headphones in, volume low, finger hovering over pause. Her voice was shaky and quiet. "He's here," she whispered. "He keeps acting like he's doing me a favor by showing up. He keeps saying you're dangerous. He keeps saying you watch people, like you're some kind of lab detective. He told my mom you get obsessive and that you don't understand boundaries. I tried to defend you, but he just smiles and says I'm naive." Her breath hitched. "He asked me if you have access to those drug tests, and I said I don't know. I didn't tell him anything, I swear." A pause, and then the part that broke through her fear into something darker. "Ray, I think he's scared of you, and Mason doesn't get scared." I paused the recording and stared at the floor, letting the words settle. He asked about drug tests, not surgeries, not closure, or drug tests. That aligned too perfectly with what I'd seen on the bench and on the count sheets. It wasn't romantic manipulation. It was operational. My phone buzzed again. Another secure message. This time, not from Mason. From the clinic's administrative liaison, someone in scheduling, requesting confirmation that the lab did not release preliminary results outside the physician's view. The phrasing was strange. Labs don't release preliminary results casually, and the system already controls access. That request sounded like someone trying to establish a narrative. If something leaked, it wasn't them. Or if an investigation started, they could claim the lab mishandled access. I didn't reply. I forwarded it to Marin and the lab director with a single line. Additional unusual inquiry, preserving for compliance. Then I added it to the incident trail. By late afternoon, compliance called me in again, this time with someone from pharmacy present. The room was small and windowless, designed to keep conversations from becoming rumors. The compliance officer, Dr. Sato, didn't ask how I felt. She asked what I observed. That was the language I understood. I described the cluster of late-night clinic talk screens ordered on Christmas, the reprinted barcodes, the chain of custody urgency, the supervised rerun and provider's correction request, and the controlled inventory discrepancy in our emergency supply count sheet. I emphasized what I could prove and what was simply abnormal, and I was careful not to imply guilt. Dr. Sato listened without interrupting, taking notes, then asked one question that made the room feel sharper. "Is this clinic affiliated with Dr. Rourke's surgical practice?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "And is your relationship with anyone in that clinic personal?" she asked, eyes steady. There it was, the bias check. The moment where my entire life could become a liability if I answered wrong. I took a breath. "I was dating someone who works in that network," I said carefully. "Not in the lab, scheduling and referrals. We're no longer together. I have not discussed any lab matters with her. My observations are based on lab workflow anomalies." Dr. Sato nodded, and her face didn't change, which meant she'd been expecting that answer. "Thank you," she said. "I'm asking because if there's any external contact, we need to contain information flow. This review will proceed on operational evidence, not personal context." Pharmacy's representative, a quiet man named Kell, slid a paper across the table. It was an internal audit request form with today's date. We're going to do a controlled substance reconciliation focusing on that clinic's ordering patterns, he said. We've had minor flags. Nothing we could justify escalating until now. Minor flags. The phrase sounded like the first crack in a dam. Dr. Sato leaned forward slightly. Also, she said, we're initiating an EHR audit for chart edit history related to the patients involved in those tox screens, including who accessed and modified medication lists. My throat went dry. Chart edit history. That wasn't my lane, but it was exactly where people hide when they want outcomes to look clean. If Mason had been falsifying outcomes, if he'd been shaping records, the edit logs would show fingerprints even if the notes looked perfect. Kell added, and we're pulling specimen routing barcodes for any reprints and chain of custody requests tied to Dr. Rourke's clinic for the last 90 days. 90 days, not a one-off. A pattern hunt. I sat there, hands folded, and felt something close to vindication, but I didn't let it show. Vindication is emotional. Emotional looks personal. Personal gets dismissed. I kept my face neutral. Dr. Sato ended the meeting with a clear instruction. Do not communicate with anyone from that clinic outside official channels. If you receive messages, forward them. If you feel pressured, report it. And do not discuss this with your former partner or mutual friends. We will handle it. I walked out of the room with my head buzzing, not with fear, but with the hum of a machine starting up. Compliance had moved this from odd lab day to institutional review. And once a hospital starts reviewing, it doesn't stop because someone's charming. When I got back to my car, I had 3 missed calls from Tessa. I stared at her name until my thumb hovered over decline. I didn't want to pull her into my process, but her earlier voice note had already confirmed something important. Mason was building a narrative about me to protect himself. That meant Tessa was in the blast radius, whether she wanted to be or not. I answered on the 4th ring. Ray, she whispered immediately. He's here again. He won't leave. He keeps smiling like everything is normal. He told my dad he wants to make peace with me. He told my mom he's worried about me because you're unstable. Her voice cracked. He said you're trying to ruin him. I closed my eyes. Tessa, I said, steady. I haven't spoken about him to anyone outside compliance. You did something, she insisted, panic rising. I can feel it. He's acting like there's a clock ticking. There was. Not because of me personally, but because of the system waking up around him. Tessa, I said, I'm going to ask you one question, and I need you to answer truthfully. Did you ever warn him that I had concerns about his clinic? Her breathing stopped. That's not a yes, I said softly. That's a pause. She started crying again, harder. I didn't mean to, she whispered. He kept asking why you didn't like him. He kept acting like you were judging him. And I said you're weird about controlled meds because you work tox and you notice everything. I said it to make him stop. I didn't think... I felt my jaw tighten, but my voice stayed calm. When did you say it? A week ago, she sobbed. He showed up at my office. He brought coffee like he owned the place. He asked about you. He asked what you do. He asked if you have access. I told him you're just a lab tech. I told him you wouldn't matter. Her voice broke. I'm sorry. There it was. The complicity question, answered without her realizing she'd just answered it. She hadn't stolen drugs. She hadn't falsified charts. But she had tipped his radar. She had helped him name the threat. And now he was acting like a man who could see his reflection in the blade. Tessa, I said, listen carefully. You need to stop talking to him about me, completely. If he calls, you don't engage. If he shows up, you don't go somewhere private. If you feel unsafe, you involve your family and you keep it public. Do you understand? She sniffed, trying to breathe. What are you doing, Ray? I paused, because this was the moment where the story could split. If I told her everything, she might warn Mason again out of fear. If I told her nothing, she might spiral into his narrative about me. I chose the middle, truth without details. I'm letting the hospital handle what the hospital handles, I said. What does that mean? She whispered. It means you don't need to save him, I said. And you don't need to save me. You need to save yourself. Her voice shrank to a thread. He said something about the board. He said people are jealous of him. He said someone's trying to destroy his practice. I didn't confirm. I didn't deny. Confirmation would become a weapon if she repeated it. I simply said, if he's innocent, he's fine. If he's not, you don't want to be standing next to him when the door is open? She went quiet again, and in that quiet I heard a different sound on the line. Mason's voice, not muffled this time, closer, relaxed, amused. Still on the phone? he asked her as if he was speaking to a child. Tessa's breath caught. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten. I said one sentence, flat and calm, to the air between us. A sentence I wanted Mason to hear because it wasn't a threat. It was a boundary. This line is being preserved. Mason laughed softly, like he enjoyed the idea of being watched. Then he said, very clearly, "Good." And the call ended. I stared at my screen for a long moment, then set the phone down and sat very still, because men like Mason don't laugh when they feel safe. They laugh when they think the system will protect them. They laugh because they believe they have more leverage than you do. That night, my lab director emailed me a single line that changed the temperature of the world. Compliance escalated to external regulatory review. Do not discuss outside official channels. External. I read it twice, then opened my calendar and realized what day it was. December 26th, the day after Christmas. The day people assume nothing happens because everyone's still eating leftovers and pretending the year hasn't started yet. But somewhere in a conference room, someone had decided the review couldn't wait. And Mason, smiling in Tessa's kitchen, didn't know how close the doors were to opening. I read the lab director's email twice, then a third time, because the word external changes the temperature of everything. Internal reviews can be stalled, smoothed over, buried under process improvements, and polite meetings. External reviews don't care who Mason Rourke is at the golf club. External reviews don't care how many donors he knows. External reviews care about logs, narcotic counts, chart edits, and patient harm, and they move with a momentum that doesn't stop just because someone smiles. I glanced at the clock on the wall above the break room microwave and felt my stomach tighten. Night shift messes with your sense of calendar time. My body insisted it was after Christmas, because I'd slept in a motel bed and woken up to gray light and missed calls, but the hospital clock didn't care about my emotional timeline. It read 12:18 a.m., December 25th. Christmas Day had just started. That meant Mason was still at Tessa's family house right now, still playing calm in front of her parents, still building the story that I was unstable while he was concerned. And somewhere else, in a sterile office with fluorescent lights and no holiday spirit, a regulatory chain had been pulled that couldn't be unpulled. I didn't celebrate that. I didn't feel victorious. I felt the kind of dread you feel when you realize the thing you wanted, truth, arrives like a storm, and storms don't choose clean targets. Tessa was going to be standing in the path whether she deserved it or not. I forced my hands to stay steady and did exactly what the email told me to do. I said nothing to anyone who didn't need to know. I forwarded the email to my personal secure archive, printed a copy for my own records, and filed it where it belonged. Then I walked back onto the floor and finished my shift like a ghost, because the lab still needed results and patients still needed care. My job didn't stop because a surgeon's life was about to fracture. At 2:05 a.m., compliance called again. This time, it wasn't Dr. Sato alone. There was a new voice on the line, clipped and formal, someone who didn't live in hospital politics. He introduced himself as an investigator assigned through the state's regulatory apparatus tied to controlled substances oversight. He didn't say DEA. He didn't have to. The tone was enough. He asked me to confirm what I personally observed, what I documented, and what I reported, and to confirm I had not accessed any patient records outside my role. I answered calmly, like a person who knows audits exist. I repeated the facts. I referenced accession numbers and workflow anomalies without naming patients. I referenced chain of custody requests and reprint flags. I referenced the internal incident report confirmation number. I referenced the provider message requesting correction. I emphasized that the rerun was supervised and confirmed the original result. No opinions, no guesses, just the trail. Then he asked the question that told me the machine was already turning. Do you have reason to believe clinic staff may attempt to alter records or destroy materials once they suspect review? I thought of Mason's voice on Tessa's call. I thought of the secure message requesting correction before formal review. I thought of the admin liaison asking if preliminary results were released outside physician view, a question that sounded like narrative scaffolding. I kept my voice neutral. Yes, I said. Based on the content and timing of communications, it appears there is concern about review and an attempt to influence documentation. Silence for a beat. Then the investigator said, "Understood." Understood is another temperature-changing word. It means the person across from you has just decided what the risk level is. It means they're no longer gathering information for curiosity. They're gathering it for action. When the call ended, I stared at my gloved hands and realized I'd crossed the line into a world where Christmas dinners don't protect you. Not from handcuffs, not from warrants, not from the way a family's living room becomes a stage for consequences. and my phone buzzed as I was hanging my lab coat. A text from Tessa, one line broken. He's smiling again. He says you're done. I stared at that sentence until my throat tightened. He says you're done. Not we're done. Not I'm done. He said it like he owned the ending. I typed, deleted, typed again, then sent the only message that wouldn't give him ammunition. Stay in public rooms. Don't be alone with him. If you feel unsafe, tell your dad. I didn't mention audits, boards, controlled substances, nothing. If she panicked and confronted Mason, he'd go into cleanup mode. The safest thing was to let the storm arrive without warning bells. At 6:47 a.m., I left the hospital under a sky that looked too gentle for what was coming. Frost clung to parked cars like a thin crust of denial. The city was quiet in that holiday way, less traffic, fewer faces, a false softness. I drove back to the motel, slept 2 hours, woke up with my heart punching my ribs like it knew something my mind hadn't processed yet. My phone had 3 new messages, one from my supervisor. Do not respond to any provider requests, Rey Rourke Clinic. Route all to lab director. One from Noah, my friend in a different story, the only one in my life who understood institutional risk. Saw chatter about a surgeon being reviewed. Stay quiet. Don't post anything. And one from an unknown number. Tell your boy to stop playing hero. My skin went cold. That message didn't come from Tessa's family. It came from Mason's orbit, someone at the clinic, someone who'd sensed the rope tightening and wanted to find the hands holding it. It wasn't a threat of violence. It was a threat of smear, of career damage, of making me look like the problem. I screenshot it, saved it, and didn't reply. Silence is a wall if you keep it clean. At noon, Nia texted, Christmas dinner at Tessa's parents' is tonight. Mason is still there. He's acting like he's the son-in-law. Tessa looks like she's dissociating. Then, a minute later, he brought a gift for her mom. He's performing. Performing. That was the right word. Mason wasn't just trying to win Tessa back. He was trying to cement his position inside a room full of witnesses before anything could pull him out. If the world turned on him tomorrow, he wanted a memory of himself as the good guy, built into the family's bones. I drove in the afternoon, not to their house, not to confront, but to be close enough to respond if Tessa needed an exit. I parked 3 blocks away near a public intersection and waited with my coat on, engine off, watching pedestrians carry grocery bags and last-minute gifts. The normal world kept moving, blind. Around 4:30 p.m., my attorney called. He didn't use holiday greetings. He didn't waste time. You did the right thing escalating through compliance, he said. I'm hearing the regulatory side is moving quickly. Do not communicate with the clinic. Do not warn anyone. If you receive threats, document and forward. Will she be questioned? I asked, and I didn't need to name who. A pause. Possibly, he said. Material witness, at minimum, depending on what's uncovered. If she's been receiving gifts or benefits tied to diverted proceeds, she could be implicated. But that depends on facts. Facts. Always facts. At 6:12 p.m., as the sky turned black and the streetlights snapped on, my phone rang. Tessa. I answered immediately, because her calls weren't casual anymore. They were signals. She whispered, He's in the dining room. Everyone's laughing. He keeps touching my shoulder like he owns me. Her voice trembled. Ray, I heard him on the phone earlier. He said he needs the count sheets cleaned. What does that mean? My stomach tightened. Count sheets. The same words I'd seen in the lab's controlled inventory chain. It means don't confront him, I said softly. Stay calm. Stay in public. Are you with your family right now? Yes, she whispered. But he keeps finding ways to pull me aside. Don't go, I said. If he asks, say you need to help your mom. Say you need the restroom and take your dad with you to the hallway. Keep it normal. Her breath caught. He'll get mad. Let him, I said, steady. Mad in front of witnesses is safer than calm alone. She went quiet for a second, then whispered, Someone just pulled into the driveway. I froze. Who? I don't know, she said. 2 cars. Then I heard it through the phone. A doorbell chime in the background, followed by the muffled sound of voices changing shape in a room. Laughter fading, chairs scraping slightly, the subtle shift of a gathering going from warm to alert. Tessa's breathing sped up. Mason's voice appeared in the distance, calm and loud enough to carry, I'll get it. Tessa whispered, He's smiling. He's still smiling. I stared through my windshield into the holiday street and felt time compress. If external review had moved fast, this was exactly how it would arrive. Quietly, decisively, with no warning, because warning is what lets people destroy evidence. Through the phone, I heard the front door open. A new voice spoke, crisp, professional, unmistakably official even through distance. "Dr. Rourke?" Mason's smile voice didn't change. "Yes. We have a warrant," the voice said. "Step aside, please." Tessa made a small sound like a sob swallowed mid-throat. Mason's voice stayed smooth. "A warrant for what exactly?" "For controlled substance diversion and related records," the voice said, and then another voice layered over it, lower. "DEA." The room behind Tessa exploded into noise. Someone gasped. Someone said, "Oh my God." Her mother's voice rose, confused, frightened. A chair scraped hard. The soft holiday performance shattered in one breath. Tessa whispered, "Ray, he's turning. He's looking at me." I could hear his footsteps, deliberate, the calm predator pace of someone deciding where the exit is. Then, close to the phone, his voice dropped low enough that I felt it more than heard it. "Hang up." Tessa's breathing became jagged. I said her name once, firm. "Tessa, put the phone down. Don't move. Let them see you." The line went muffled, like her hand covered the mic. Voices overlapped, official instructions, family confusion, Mason's measured objection turning into clipped irritation. Then the muffling lifted, and I heard the clearest sound of all, the metallic click of handcuffs closing. The room went silent for a fraction of a second, the way rooms do when reality arrives so hard nobody has a script for it. Then Tessa spoke, small and broken. "He's in cuffs." A voice in the background announced, "Dr. Mason Rourke, you are under arrest." I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles ached, not because I wanted to fight, but because my body needed somewhere to put the surge of adrenaline. This was the beat nobody believes happens on Christmas Day until it happens to them. 40 relatives in a dining room, holiday plates still warm, and a surgeon who thought his reputation was armor being let out like any other suspect. And in the chaos, as agents moved through the house, I heard another voice, one that made my stomach drop. "Who's Rey Hale?" an investigator asked, loud enough that it carried through the room. Tessa inhaled sharply, because now, in front of everyone, with the cuffs still clicking in the air, my name had just entered the scene. When you hear your own name spoken in a room you're not in, something in your body wants to stand up even if you're miles away. Sitting in my parked car 3 blocks from Tessa's parents' house, phone pressed so hard to my ear it hurt, I heard the investigator's voice cut through the Christmas chaos. "Who's Rey Hale?" He said it like a line item, like he was reading names off a form, but in that living room, it might as well have been a spotlight. Through the phone, I heard air disappear. Someone's fork clinked against a plate. Tessa inhaled like a person stepping on broken glass. Her mother's voice came first, small and bewildered. "He's Tessa's boyfriend." Then a wobble. "Was. Boyfriend." Past tense. It landed like a verdict in my chest. There was movement, shoes scuffing on hardwood, chairs scraping, the low murmur of relatives trying to decide whether to be more afraid for the man in cuffs or the name they just heard. The investigator spoke again, closer to the phone now, tone steady and professional in a way that didn't care about centerpieces or holiday napkins. "Is he here?" he asked. Tessa's voice materialized, thin and frayed. "No, he's not here." "Has he been to this house tonight?" the investigator asked. "No," she said again, louder now, as if volume could turn it into protection. He was disinvited." That little word dropped like a stone into deep water. Disinvited. A stranger wouldn't hear the whole history inside it. I did. So did Mason, probably. Somewhere under the sound of clinking glass and rustling coats, I heard him laugh once, short and derisive, like the idea of me being thrown out and then pulled back into the story amused him even with metal on his wrists. The investigator's voice sharpened. "Why?" Tessa hesitated, and in that pause I felt every instinct fighting inside her. Tell the truth and expose her own choices. Lie and maybe drag this out longer. She tried to split the difference. We argued," she said. "I made a mistake. I told him not to come. It's personal." "Personal can become relevant," the investigator said calmly. "Did Mr. Hale express concerns about Dr. Rourke's work to you at any point?" The room went quiet enough that I could hear my own pulse in my ears. This was the collision I'd been trying to avoid, the line where my professional vigilance met our private fights. Tessa's answer came out halting. He noticed things. At work, he works in the lab." "In toxicology?" A different voice chimed in. Nia, probably, because she always noticed details. "He's thorough." The investigator didn't let the room steer. Did he tell you he filed any kind of report? He asked. Tessa's breath hitched. No, he didn't tell me that. He just worries. It was technically true. I hadn't told her about the reports. I hadn't needed to. Her one thoughtless comment, "You're weird about controlled meds, he might notice everything," had been enough to light Mason's fear. There was a pause, papers rustling, the low murmur of agents moving through hallways. Then the investigator asked the question I'd been bracing for without knowing it. Did you warn Dr. Rourke that Mr. Hale had concerns? Tessa's voice fractured. I told him Ray's observant. I didn't say he filed anything. So yes, the investigator said, not unkindly, but with the finality of someone closing a loop. You told Dr. Rourke your boyfriend watches controlled substance patterns. Tessa started crying, the kind of ugly, unedited crying that doesn't care who's watching. I'm sorry, she kept saying. I'm sorry. On my end of the line, I felt anger rise, bright, hot, useless, and then drain away as fast as it came. Anger wouldn't change math. The math was simple. I'd seen something. I'd reported it. Mason had sensed a threat. Tessa had confirmed his suspicion. Now, federal agents were in her parents' dining room on Christmas, and my name was filed in somebody's notebook under whistleblower. The investigator shifted gears. Ms. Caro, he said, using her last name now. Formal, contextual. We'll have follow-up questions for you later. For now, sit down, stay with your family, and don't delete anything from your phone. Do you understand? Yes, she whispered. The call must have dipped away from her hand then, because the sound muffled. I caught fragments, her father protesting, her mother insisting there must be a mistake, an aunt insisting Mason was a good man, a cousin asking if this would be on the news. Mason himself said very little, just one low, irritated line I could make out. This is all because some night shift lab rat decided to play hero. It should have stung. It didn't. It only confirmed who he thought the villain was and who he thought the audience would believe. Then the connection cut completely. Either the phone slipped from Tessa's hand, or she hung up without meaning to, or someone told her to. My screen showed the ended call, cold and neutral. Duration, 12 minutes, 43 seconds. I sat there in the idling car, breathing in air that smelled faintly of cold plastic and old coffee, and realized that if I drove home now, I'd spend the night staring at the ceiling, replaying the same 12 minutes until sunrise. So I didn't drive home, I drove to the hospital. The parking lot was strangely full for Christmas night. Emergencies don't care about holidays, and neither does bureaucracy. Inside, the air buzzed with the usual mix of disinfectant and fatigue. I flashed my badge at security and took the stairs instead of the elevator, because my body needed the vertical motion. On the lab floor, Marin met me halfway down the hall. She must have seen my name pop up in a flurry of internal emails because she didn't bother with small talk. They're here, she said. Upstairs in a conference room. Compliance wants to see you before they talk to you. Who's they? I asked, though I already knew. Board reps, regulatory liaison, and a federal agent with a badge he didn't bother to hide, she said dryly. Come on. We walked together to the administrative wing. The conference room they'd claimed wasn't fancy, just a long table, a cheap carafe of burned coffee, and a whiteboard with someone's forgotten holiday doodles still on the side. Little snowmen and a crooked tree, incongruous against the suit jackets and stern faces. Dr. Sato sat at the head of the table, Kel from pharmacy to her left, the hospital's legal counsel to her right. Across from them were two people I didn't recognize, one in a plain dark suit with an ID badge clipped to his breast pocket, another in a neat dress shirt with State Medical Board on his credentials. This was no longer an internal huddle. This was a joint. Dr. Sato gestured to an empty chair near her. Mr. Hale, thank you for coming in. I sat, my hands folded instinctively, like I was preparing to give a deposition. Maybe I was. The man in the dark suit introduced himself with only his last name, Jennings, and his agency affiliation in the vaguest possible terms. He thanked me for my cooperation, the way people do when they have subpoena power and don't technically need your cooperation but prefer it. The medical board rep, Dr. Cohen, nodded once, pen poised over his pad. Jennings started with the basics. Mr. Hale, we understand you filed an internal incident report regarding controlled substance discrepancies and unusual lab orders connected to Dr. Mason Rourke's clinic. We've reviewed the logs. We'd like you to walk us through, in your own words, what you observed. I told them. Not everything. No Tessa, no Christmas disinvite, no whispered threats in kitchens. Just the lab, just the counts, just the rerun. I described the reprinted barcodes, the chain of custody requests, the inconsistent tox screen, the request to correct before formal review. I emphasized dates and times. I referenced report numbers and accession IDs. Jennings listened without interrupting, occasionally glancing at a printout in front of him. Dr. Cohen underlined things on his legal pad. When I finished, Jennings leaned back. "Did you, at any point, contact Dr. Rourke directly?" he asked. "No," I said. All communication was through the lab's secure provider message system. My supervisor and director handled any responses. "Did Dr. Rourke at any point attempt to contact you outside official channels?" he asked. I hesitated. This was the line where my personal and professional lives crossed, but the question was narrowly worded, and I knew better than to bend it. "Not directly," I said. "People associated with his clinic sent me messages." I mentioned the anonymous "tell your boy to stop playing hero" text, without speculating on who sent it. I let them draw their own conclusions. Dr. Cohen spoke up then, his voice more clinical than confrontational. "Your relationship with Ms. Caro, how long have you been involved?" "About a year," I said. "And she works in the same network," he confirmed. "Scheduling and referrals." "Yes." "Has she ever expressed concern about Dr. Rourke's behavior unrelated to your observations?" he asked. I thought about it, about the small comments. "He's intense, but he's brilliant. He doesn't like being questioned. He gets the best outcomes." They were always wrapped in admiration, fear, and rationalization. "She's described him as demanding," I said carefully. "Protective of his reputation, attached to his numbers." "Did she ever tell you he pressured her at work?" he pressed. "Not in those words," I said. She framed it as him being involved in her career. Jennings watched my face as I spoke, weighing not just my answers, but my control. "We're not here to evaluate your relationship, Mr. Hale," he said, "but we are documenting potential influence channels. Dr. Rourke appears to have used personal relationships to manage information flow." He didn't say, "Your girlfriend helped him understand you were a threat." He didn't have to. The words sat unspoken between us. Hospital counsel cleared her throat. "Mr. Hale has been fully compliant with internal policy," she said, which was lawyer speak for he did what he was supposed to. "If you're looking for negligence, look elsewhere." Jennings nodded. "We appreciate that." He slid a paper across the table. "We're issuing a formal notice that you may be called as a witness in both administrative and potential criminal proceedings." He tapped the paper. "This does not implicate you in any wrongdoing. It simply formalizes your role. Do you understand?" I read the document. It was exactly what he'd described. No surprises, just language about cooperation, confidentiality, and contact procedures. It did, however, contain one line that made my stomach clench. "Subject should refrain from discussing this matter with individuals identified as potential subjects of investigation or their close associates. Tessa." "I understand," I said, signing where he indicated. The pen felt heavier than it was. The meeting wrapped with logistics, the timeline for further interviews, instructions for preserving my notes, cautions about social media. As I stood to leave, Dr. Sato touched my forearm lightly. "You did the right thing," she said, low enough that only I heard. "I know it doesn't feel like it now, but you did." I nodded, not trusting my voice. "I just followed procedure," I said. Her mouth curved in the barest hint of a smile. "That's usually what saves people." Outside the conference room, the hallway felt both too bright and too narrow. I leaned against the cool wall tiles and closed my eyes for a moment, letting the weight of it settle. Their questions had been precise. Their tone had been controlled. That meant they already had more than they were telling me. This wasn't a fishing expedition. This was a net closing. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, half expecting another unknown threat. Instead, it was a text from a number I did recognize. Tessa's mother. "I'm sure you've heard," she wrote. "I don't understand what's happening. Tessa is a mess. I don't know what you did or didn't do, but please don't abandon her." I stared at the words until they blurred. The part of me that had once wanted to impress this woman with nice wine and polite conversation wanted to text back some long explanation to tell her I hadn't abandoned anyone, that their daughter had told me not to come, and then cried when Consequence chose a different seat at the table. The rest of me, the part that had just signed a document telling me not to discuss the case with close associates, knew I couldn't say anything real without opening a door I couldn't close. So I wrote the only thing I could that didn't violate the paper I just signed. "I'm glad she's with her family," I typed. "She needs you." Then I put the phone back in my pocket before I could add anything that would make me feel better and make things worse. News traveled faster than official statements. By the time I reached the parking lot again, Mason's arrest was already leaking through healthcare gossip chains. Noah texted a screenshot of a group chat from another hospital. Heard a big-name surgeon got picked up for diversion. Merry Christmas, I guess. Under it, Noah wrote, "They don't know it's your guy. Yet. The word made me want to throw my phone into a snowbank. Instead, I sat in my car and scrolled through notifications until one headline finally appeared from a local station. Prominent clinic surgeon under investigation for prescription irregularities. No name yet. Just prominent and under investigation. Enough to start the murmurs. I didn't click the article. I didn't need to feed the part of me that wanted to see his face in a mugshot. That wasn't why I'd done any of this. This hadn't been about revenge. It had been about narcotic count sheets and patient safety and not letting a man with a God complex rewrite chemistry. Still, there was a strange, jagged satisfaction in picturing him sitting in a stark room answering questions he couldn't charm his way out of. Satisfaction and something uglier. Grief for the version of my life that wouldn't exist anymore. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was Tessa. "He's gone," she wrote. "They took him. Everyone's looking at me like I knew. Did you? Is this you?" The question sliced between accusation and hope. If it was me, then maybe this had a story, a shape. If it wasn't, then the world was hunting her ex for reasons she couldn't control. I thought about not answering. Letting her stew in ambiguity might have been the cleaner self-protection move. But silence has its own cruelty, and there was enough of that already. I typed slowly. I reported discrepancies I saw at work, I wrote. Others saw more. This is bigger than you and me? 3 dots appeared, blinked, vanished. Then, "Did you know it would happen tonight?" I stared at that one for a long moment. Lightning storms don't send save-the-date notices. I could have said that. Instead, I told the truth. "No," I wrote. External review started. Timing wasn't mine. Another pause. Then, "They asked about you. In front of everyone. My mom, my dad, him. I told them we weren't together. I told them I disinvited you." "You did," I thought. That part didn't need correcting. "I'm sorry," she added. "For that. For him. For all of it." I believed her. I also knew that apologies don't rewind audits. They don't resurrect trust. They don't change the fact that she'd stood in a kitchen days earlier and told a dangerous man that her boyfriend was weird about controlled meds, and that maybe he'd notice things. She hadn't meant to arm him. She had. I didn't type any of that. Instead, I wrote, "Cooperate. Don't delete anything. Get a lawyer if they offer one. This isn't about protecting him anymore." Her reply was immediate, a raw nerve of a question. "What about us?" There it was, the part of the story that would cut either way, no matter how careful I'd been with everything else. I looked at the glowing screen, thumb hovering over the keyboard, and knew that whatever I wrote next would close a chapter I hadn't been ready to admit was already over. I put the phone down, face up on the passenger seat, and watched the winter light drain out of the sky over the hospital's concrete facade. Nurses walked in and out carrying coffee, wearing Santa print scrub caps, laughing the brittle laughter of people who had seen too much that day. Somewhere inside, machines beeped, blood flowed in tubing, and my lab kept doing its quiet work. When I finally picked the phone back up, I didn't write a speech. I didn't dissect her choices or mine. I didn't tell her she'd betrayed me, because betrayal implies intent, and hers had been something messier, a loyalty split between fear and comfort. I wrote one sentence. "We don't have an us that survives this, Tess." I watched the message bubble hang for a heartbeat, and then leave my screen, delivered. No unsent, no edit. Just a boundary, finally spoken without a rooftop, without an audience, without anyone filming. Her response didn't come right away. When it did, it wasn't words. It was a single crying face emoji, the kind people use when they've run out of language and still want you to see their pain. I stared at it until the screen dimmed and realized that even now, part of me wanted to fix it, to drive over there, to be the stable one in a house where the golden son-in-law had just been let out in cuffs, to prove I wasn't the villain Mason had painted. But I'd just watched what happened when you stand beside a man who thinks he's untouchable. I wasn't going to stand beside someone who had helped him, even by accident. I turned the phone all the way off for the first time in days, sat in the quiet rattling frame of my car, and listened to the dull roar of the highway beyond the hospital campus. Cars full of people going to dinners, to families, to lives that hadn't just detonated. And in that rare, total silence, I understood something that hurt as much as it steadied me. I hadn't just reported a surgeon, I'd amputated a future. And the wound was going to ache long after the storm finished tearing through Mason's life. I didn't sleep so much as blackout for a few hours with the phone off, like a machine powered down to keep from overheating. When I finally turned it back on, the motel room was still gloomy with half-drawn curtains and stale air, and my body felt hollow, like I'd been scooped out. The phone took a moment to revive. Logo, loading, a spinning wheel, and then the notifications hit all at once. A little avalanche of other people's reactions to a story they weren't inside. News alerts first. Local station push notifications upgraded from prominent clinic surgeon under investigation to a full name and photo. Dr. Mason Rourke faces prescription diversion probe. The headline sat above the kind of picture doctors like to use on hospital websites. White coat, easy smile, arms folded, soft background blur. Underneath, the words had teeth: controlled substance irregularities, morbidity review, potential federal charges. They mentioned whistleblower input without naming me, and cooperation from internal hospital staff. Without describing what it feels like to watch someone you know be reduced to a paragraph. Then came the personal messages. Colleagues, is this about your lab? You okay? Heard anything? People I hadn't heard from in months suddenly remembered I existed. A cousin sent a link with, "Isn't this near where you work?" Like geography was the relevant connection. Noah's text cut through the noise like a scalpel. Media's going to spin this 8 ways. Don't comment. Ever. Call me if you need to scream. I didn't scream. I scrolled. Social media was already chewing on it. Anonymous healthcare accounts posted vague threads about yet another surgeon thinking the DEA is a suggestion. Comment sections sprouted arguments between people who wanted to believe Mason was innocent and people who'd been waiting for someone like him to fall. He saved my aunt's life, warred with, "Doctors get away with everything," and "This is why we need stricter oversight." No one in those threads knew him personally. They didn't know the way he filled a doorway, the way he smiled when he was sharpening a threat, the way he turned Tessa's shoulders into handholds during conversations so she couldn't move away. I didn't see Tessa's name anywhere. That was both a relief and a ticking clock. Anonymous sources don't stay anonymous forever when cases get big enough. The more the story grew, the more likely it was that her involvement, as witness, as ex-girlfriend, as quiet messenger, would leak in some shape, even if the details never made it into print. My phone buzzed with a new notification. Hospital email. Mandatory media contact policy reminder sent to all staff, reminding us not to speak to anyone outside official channels. It wasn't subtle. Someone had already tried to talk, or they were trying to prevent it. The hospital's logo at the top of the email looked like a forced smile. I set the phone down, stared at the textured motel ceiling, and felt the question I'd been avoiding creep up from underneath everything else. What exactly had I done to Tessa? Not the thing with Mason. The reporting, the compliance, the external review. That part I could defend in my sleep. Patience outweighed my relationship. Narcotic counts outweighed my comfort. But personally? I'd walked away from her, blocked the only safe harbor she thought she had while the storm crashed through her parents' dining room. I'd told myself it was about boundaries, about not being her shield in a fight she'd helped arm. That was still true. It just didn't make the image of her crying at that table any softer. The phone buzzed again. This time it was compliance. Formal interview schedule for staff who'd been directly involved or adjacent to Mason's cases. Mine was now, basically. Please report to conference room B at 10:30. It was 10:02. I threw on clean scrubs, the spare set from my duffel, splashed water on my face, and drove back to the hospital. The campus looked the same as always. Gray, utilitarian, humming with quiet urgency, but I saw new cars parked near the administrative entrance. Government plates, unfamiliar sedans, people in suits walking with purpose instead of visitors strolling with confusion. Even without badges, regulatory bodies have a posture. Conference room B had been stripped of holiday doodles. The snowmen were gone, whiteboard wiped clean. Dr. Sato sat with the same calm I'd seen before, Kel from pharmacy flipping through spreadsheets, and Jennings from the night before with a fresh stack of folders. Next to him, a woman I hadn't met yet. Blonde hair pulled back tight, eyes like polished glass, badge identifying her as part of the Diversion Control Division. She nodded when I walked in but didn't smile. "Mr. Hale," Jennings said, "we appreciate your time." I sat where they indicated, hands loosely folded, like I was about to take an exam I hadn't studied for but had lived through. Blonde glass eyes introduced herself as Agent Morales. Her voice was steady, precise. "We have call detail records, internal messaging logs, and preliminary audit findings," she said. "We're narrowing timelines and influence paths. We'll need you to confirm certain sequences and clarify your knowledge versus your suspicions." That wording mattered. Knowledge versus suspicion. It drew a bright line I needed to stay on the safe side of. They started with the familiar. My reports, the lab anomalies, the reprinted barcodes, the rerun. I repeated what I'd said before. Jennings clicked his pen, Morales underlined. Then they pivoted. We've reviewed call detail records between Dr. Rourke and Ms. Caro, Morales said. We've also reviewed Ms. Caro's texts to you. We're not here to litigate your relationship, but her communications overlap with certain key days. We need to understand how information may have flowed. My throat went dry. I nodded. Okay. Morales slid a redacted printout across the table. Names and numbers were blacked out except where they wanted my focus. This is a call from Ms. Caro to you 8 days ago, she said. You discussed concerns about post-op ordering patterns. I remembered the call vaguely. Me half asleep after a shift. Tessa venting about Mason being intense about his schedule. Me saying something about how some surgeons overordered just in case and how it made inventory audits hell. I hadn't named patients. I hadn't named drugs. I'd complained about workflow. We're not suggesting you disclose confidential information, Morales said, reading my tension. In fact, our review shows you didn't. But 2 hours after that call, Ms. Caro called Dr. Rourke and had a 16-minute conversation. Shortly after, his clinic's ordering pattern changed. Fewer direct requests, more routed through a different provider code. She tapped the page. That's the kind of correlation we look at. My stomach twisted, not because I thought I was guilty, but because I could see the shape of the trap tightening. I didn't tell her anything she could use, I said quietly. I vented about counts. I didn't say I was filing anything. Morales nodded. We know. Her testimony matches that. Her testimony? I repeated, the word heavier than I liked. She's been interviewed as a material witness, Jennings said. She cooperated. She confirmed that Dr. Rourke asked about you, specifically after she mentioned your job. She admitted she told him you were observant with controlled meds. That's in the record. I exhaled slowly. I didn't ask her to say that. We know, Morales repeated. But this brings us to what we call the complicity question. The phrase hung in the air like the name of a disease. We need to understand, she continued, whether you believed Ms. Caro was intentionally aiding Dr. Rourke in avoiding scrutiny, or whether you saw her as someone being manipulated by him. I stared at the table for a second, tracing the grain with my eyes. If I said she helped him, they'd mark her as closer to the target. If I said she's innocent, they'd treat me like I was blinded. The truth was uglier and more human. She'd been both. A person who thought she was protecting her comfort and ended up protecting his crimes. I think, I said slowly, that she was scared of him and flattered by him at the same time. I think he used that, and she didn't want to admit it, even to herself. I think when she told him about me being observant, she thought she was de-escalating, getting him to stop obsessing. I don't think she understood how that would land in his head. Morales studied my face for a moment like she was cross-referencing my words against some internal file. So you see her as a vector, not an architect, she summarized. Yes, I said. A bridge he walked over, not the one who built it. Jennings jotted something down. Noted. They asked a few more questions about specific dates, confirming that I hadn't reached out after hearing certain threats, that all my reports went through internal channels. Then Agent Morales slid another page forward, this one with heavier redactions. We're telling you this next part because we need your cooperation and your discretion, she said. In the course of our review, we've identified financial flows from accounts controlled by Dr. Rourke to individuals in his circle. Some of those funds appear to originate from fraudulent billing and diverted inventory. My gut clenched. I knew where this was going before she said it. Ms. Caro received several gifts during your relationship, Morales continued, including a trip, some jewelry, and deposits into her account marked as consulting. She stated those were from Dr. Rourke during a period where they were attempting to remain friends. We have reason to believe those funds may be tied to his diversion proceeds. I pictured the bracelet, a different one than the one I'd returned. The weekend trip she'd described as a friend's cabin, the way she'd brushed off the origin of extra money as a bonus for helping with scheduling. My chest tightened with a second wave of betrayal, softer but just as cutting. Not just emotional, but financial, structural. Is she being charged? I asked, the words tasting like metal. Not at this time, Morales said. Her cooperation factors heavily into that decision. But she is being evaluated as a potential beneficiary of diverted funds. That's why we asked you the complicity question, your characterization of her matters. I swallowed. I could have punished her in that moment if I'd wanted to. I could have said she loved the gifts, that she bragged, that she knew. Some of that would have even been emotionally true. But law doesn't deal in emotional truth. It deals in intent and proof. I think she didn't ask where the money came from because she didn't want to know, I said. which is its own kind of responsibility. But I don't think she understood it would lead here. Morales' eyes softened by a fraction. That aligns with what we're seeing, she said. She's not at the center of this, but she's not untouched. They dismissed me after that with the usual instructions: stay reachable, don't discuss details, preserve notes. As I stood, Dr. Cohen from the medical board added one quiet comment that landed harder than all the formal language. "Mr. Hale," he said, "in board hearings we often forget there are people like you and Ms. Caro on the edges. This isn't your burden to carry alone, but I understand you'll try." I didn't answer. There wasn't anything to say that wouldn't sound like I was auditioning for sainthood, and I was too tired for that. In the hallway outside, my phone buzzed with a message from Nia. "Are you okay to talk?" I almost ignored it, then sighed and called her, leaning against a vending machine humming with the promise of plastic-wrapped snacks I didn't want. She picked up on the first ring. "You're on speaker," she said. "I'm in my car. Tell me if you need me to turn it off." I pictured her small hatchback, full of reusable shopping bags and empty coffee cups, her hair probably in a messy knot. "You can leave it," I said. "I trust your car." She snorted softly. "That's a first." Then her voice shifted. "They questioned Tessa," she said. "For hours. She came out looking like she'd been run over. She said they showed her phone logs, Ray, down to minute marks. They knew exactly when she'd called him after talking to you." My stomach knotted. "She tell you what they asked?" "Some," Nia said. "They wanted to know if she'd warned him. She tried to say no at first. Then they read back her own words from a call transcript, like exact phrases. He notices everything. If there's a pattern, he'll see it." She said it was like listening to a version of herself she didn't remember choosing. The image made my skin crawl. Your own words, stripped of tone and justification, held up like evidence. I'd heard my share in my head already. Hearing them from someone else's mouth would feel like being haunted. "She asked me," Nia hesitated. "She asked me if you thought she'd done it on purpose. If you thought she'd chosen him over you, over patience." I leaned my head back against the cool vending machine glass. "What did you say?" "I said you think too much to answer that in one sentence," Nia said, "and that's not always a compliment." A tired laugh tried to escape my chest and died halfway. "She's not wrong to ask," I murmured. "No," Nia agreed. "But the questions pointed the wrong direction. It's not, did I betray him or you? It's, who taught me to accept this as normal? He did. Her family did. All of us a little bit, maybe, by laughing off his crap because he was talented." Silence sat between us for a moment, gentler than the silence in the conference room had been. "She said something else," Nia added. "She said she realized in that chair that you suspected her collusion before they showed her the logs. Because you told her, I'm not the person you need to apologize to." I remembered saying it, voice flat over the line, trying to pry her attention away from me and toward her own choices. It hadn't been strategic, it had been exhausted. "What did she do with that realization?" I asked. "She cried harder," Nia said. "Which is not useful data, I know, but human." "Is she okay?" I asked, hating how small the word sounded against everything that had just happened. "No," Nia said bluntly. "But she might be someday. That's the best I can give you right now." We talked a little longer about neutral things. Holiday shifts, staff gossip, the way hospitals always smell like the same 3 cleaning products no matter what city you're in. When we hung up, I sat in the stairwell for a while, listening to muffled footsteps and the distant wail of an ambulance arriving, the sounds of a world that hadn't paused for Mason's fall. Days blurred after that, the way they do when the system shifts into slow, grinding mode. Mason's license was suspended pending a full hearing. The hospital separated from his clinic in a carefully worded statement full of passive verbs. Patients started calling, confused and angry, demanding answers that no one could give them yet. Internal memos reminded us to direct all media inquiries to PR. People whispered in break rooms, trying to reconcile the gifted surgeon with the man in the headline. Through it all, Tessa existed in my peripheral vision like a ghost I'd known intimately once and now only saw as a figure in someone else's report. We didn't talk. We couldn't, not without violating instructions and muddying testimony. But she seeped into everything anyway. In the way HR mentioned support services for affected staff, in the way Nia's text veered between fury at Mason and defensiveness of her friend, in the way my own mind replayed small moments with brutal clarity. The time Tessa had come home with a new bag and called it a perk. The description of a weekend at a friend's cabin that turned out, in hindsight, to be Mason's property. The way she defended his demanding nature as just how high performers are. Each memory felt like a slide in a relationship autopsy, labeled and backlit. One evening, about a week after the arrest, I found myself in the empty lab at the end of my shift, lights dimmed, machines in their idle hum. The specimen racks were mostly empty, Christmas having passed and elective procedures slowed. I stood at the counter with a pad of paper I wasn't supposed to use for anything official and started drawing 2 columns without fully deciding to. Left column, things I loved. Her laugh when she forgot to be careful. The way she curled her feet under her on the couch. The fact that she never flinched at my weirder facts about toxins and lab anomalies. Right column, things I ignored. The way she minimized her own discomfort to keep the peace. The way she said, "He's intense, but about Mason." The way she accepted gifts without asking why certain surgeons could afford to be that generous. It wasn't a scientific analysis, it was a grieving ritual. But like all rituals, it told me something. The scales were never pure. Love wasn't blind, it was selectively myopic. I'd seen enough to worry, but not enough to walk away. Not until she told me not to come to Christmas so she could catch up with him, and the last thin piece of denial snapped. I tore the page out, folded it once, and dropped it in the confidential waste bin. It wasn't meant to be preserved. It was meant to be released. On my way out, my phone buzzed. Unknown number again, but this time the tone of the message was different. "Mr. Hale," it read. "This is Carol Peterson from Channel 7. We're doing a story about controlled substance diversion and how staff identify irregularities. We've heard your name as someone who did the right thing. Would you be willing to speak anonymously?" I stared at the text until my eyes burned. Part of me wanted to say yes, to control the narrative, to make sure the public understood that this hadn't been a witch hunt, that people inside the system cared, but I could already hear Jennings's voice in my head. Do not discuss this with media. And beyond that, I understood something more dangerous. The second I let myself become the hero whistleblower on television, I'd stop being a reliable witness and start being a character in someone else's story. I typed, "I'm not able to comment," and sent it. Then I blocked the number. Not because I disliked Carol Peterson, but because I knew my own weakness. Validation is a drug too. I couldn't afford to get hooked. Walking out into the cold, my breath fogging in the air, I realized the real cascade hadn't even started yet. Arrest is spectacle. Hearings, board decisions, indictments, plea deals. That's the slow burn. Patients crawling out of the woodwork with stories of pain mismanaged or pills prescribed too easily. Nurses suddenly remembering times they'd signed count sheets they hadn't seen. Administrators trying to remember who approved what, and amid it all, people like Tessa being asked over and over, "What did you know, and when did you know it?" I couldn't shield her from those questions. I couldn't answer them for her. All I could do was keep my lane clean and trust that, somewhere down the line, the truth pieced together from all our separate shards would look something like justice. Justice doesn't heal everything. It doesn't give you back Christmas or the version of yourself that believed certain smiles were safe. It doesn't undo the moment you decide to walk away from someone who's crying because they finally see the consequences of choices you warned them about months ago. But standing in that parking lot, hands shoved deep into my coat pockets, watching my breath disappear into the night, I clung to one small, stubborn comfort. I had refused to lie. Not for Mason, not for Tessa, not for myself. And in a world built on edits and half-truths and curated optics, that felt, if not like victory, then at least like a kind of survival I could live with. In the end, it didn't come down to a single dramatic confrontation in a hallway or a shouted confession in a courtroom. It came down to spreadsheets and signatures, slow and relentless the way gravity is relentless. And by the time the legal machinery finished grinding, Mason's life looked less like a fallen god's and more like an accounting problem someone finally balanced. The DEA's diversion team and the board's investigators built what they called an evidence vault. Every tox report I'd touched, every specimen routing barcode, every narcotic count sheet Kel had flagged, every EHR edit of Mason's that corrected post-op pain scores. Downward while refill requests spiked, every peer review morbidity note that had quietly been softened. When I was brought in to review the final matrix as a witness, I stared at the wall of data and felt something I hadn't expected. Relief that the case didn't rest on my word against his, or on Tessa's tears, or on anyone's love life. It rested on physics. Pills leaving cabinets, log entries not matching, patients coded as improved, while their lab values said otherwise. That's what you want if you care about truth, not vibes. Math. Somewhere in the middle of that long, slow build-up, I got the callback that locked the door from my side. It was 3 months after Christmas, the night before Mason's medical board hearing, and I was on break staring at a vending machine when my phone lit with Tessa's name. I almost let it go to voicemail. Curiosity won by a hair. When I answered, she didn't cry this time. Her voice was scraped raw, but calmer, like the worst of the screaming had burned out. "Ray," she said, "I know you hate me, but I need to explain why I—" She tripped over the word, reached for the old reflex. "Because—" I felt the old ache stir and then sit down. "You don't have to," I said. "I know about the surgeries. I reported him months ago. If you want an explanation, check the news in the morning." There was a small, shocked inhale, the sound of someone realizing the story in her head had been outdated for a while. "The surgeries," she repeated, like she was tasting the word for the first time. I didn't fill the silence. "They showed me the audit," she whispered finally. "The one that lines up his best outcomes with changed notes and missing meds. They played me my own calls. I kept trying to make it about us, but they didn't care. They just kept asking where the money went." That was the other piece I'd been avoiding. The federal cascade the agents had hinted at when they showed me the redacted bank flows. They'd traced diverted opioids sold off-book, then laundered through shell consulting contracts and bonuses to key staff. Mason's specialty hadn't just been surgery, it had been making stolen drugs look like gratitude. Tessa had been on the receiving end of a few of those thank yous, and now the tidy narrative of "I'm just dating my intense ex" had been invaded by phrases like beneficiary of diversion proceeds. "They say I have to testify," she said, voice small. "If I cooperate, they won't charge me. They showed me the ledger, Ray. They showed me the trip, the deposits. The bag I said was from my aunt. I didn't want to see it." "You see it now," I said, not unkindly. "That matters." She let out a laugh that sounded like it hurt. "Do you ever get tired of being right?" "Constantly," I said. "It doesn't fix anything." We met once more before the hearing, not at a coffee shop or in a kitchen, but in a small, neutral conference room the hospital used for sensitive discussions, which is administrator code for everything that hurts. My attorney sat at the far end of the table with a folder. Hers sat at the other, and between them we laid out the paper that had been haunting both of us. Pharmacy inventory audit trails, payment logs, the tidy chain of consulting deposits that lined up with spikes in missing stock. Tessa stared at the pages like they were crime scene photos from a life she didn't recognize. Her fingers hovered over her own name, printed next to amounts she'd once described as a little extra help with rent. "You knew before I did," she said finally. "Not an accusation, just an observation." "Not about this level," I answered, "but I knew the shape." "And you still bought me that bracelet," she said, almost to herself. I thought of the one I'd returned, the one she never knew about. "Yeah," I said. "I did dumb, hopeful things too." We went through the relationship autopsy one page at a time, not rehashing every fight or every kiss, just lining up the moments where feeling and fact diverged. She admitted she'd liked the way being around Mason made her feel powerful, how his dinners and gifts made the clinic politics seem worth it, how his approval was a kind of drug even before the real ones entered the picture. I admitted I'd liked being the calm one, the one who noticed patterns, the one she came home to complain to, even as I became one of the patterns myself. "I'm not here to forgive you," I said when we'd exhausted the pages and ourselves. "I don't have to, but I'm not here to damn you either. You're going to have enough of that from strangers with badges." Tears gathered, but didn't fall. "So, what are you here for?" "To make sure," I said, "that you walk into that hearing knowing exactly what you're standing next to if you decide to protect him one more time." She flinched, like the word protect had more edges than she'd expected. On sentencing day nearly a year later, I sat in the back row of a federal courtroom 3 states away, far from the town where we'd shared an apartment and an almost future. I'd taken a position at a trauma center by then, a bigger hospital with more blood and less pretense, where my nights were longer, but my head was clearer. They'd recruited me partly for my experience with diversion detection, partly because word had spread, not the gossip version, but the internal, this guy actually follows protocol version HR circulates when they want to sound serious about integrity. Commendation is an odd word to hear applied to yourself when the only thing you did was not look away. Mason looked smaller without the white coat, smaller without the curated aura of genius. Prison khaki and fluorescent lighting stripped him down to a middle-aged man with thinning hair and a stubborn tilt to his chin. He listened to the judge recite counts, diversion, fraud, false statements, with that same faint smirk I'd heard in his voice on the phone the night he told Tessa I was playing hero. It faded when the sentence landed. 15 years, license permanently revoked, restitution and civil judgments that would outlive his practice by decades. The harmed patients, some in wheelchairs, some with canes, some just holding each other's hands too tightly, sat 2 rows ahead of me, faces turned toward the bench, not toward him. Justice doesn't fix their pain, I thought, but it at least stops him from renting it out again. I saw Tessa only briefly afterward, in a hallway outside the courtroom, flanked by her attorney. She'd testified months earlier, halting and honest, her voice shaking as she described the gifts and the pressure and her own willful blindness. The board had recommended no charges for her. She'd lost her job, but kept her freedom. Now she looked like someone who'd traded illusion for insomnia. Our eyes met for all of 2 seconds. She gave a small nod, not asking for anything, not offering anything, just acknowledging that we'd both survived the same storm from different angles. I nodded back and kept walking. A week after I started at the trauma center, an internal memo went around announcing a small recognition award for exceptional adherence to controlled substance protocols and whistleblower integrity. My name was on it. My new colleagues clapped in that polite way people do when they're told something is a big deal but don't know you yet. That night, in the dim light of my new on-call room, my phone buzzed with a number I still knew by heart. Her final text was simple. I'm sorry for all of it. I watched the typing bubble shimmer like it wanted to add more and then vanish. I thought about every version of myself that would have written back, "It's okay," or "Me too," or "Let's talk sometime," and realized none of those men existed anymore. I let the message sit on the screen, bright and small and heavy, and then I did the quietest, most decisive thing you can do in the digital age. I didn't answer. I put the phone face down, walked back onto the floor where a trauma alert was coming in, and let the only story that still mattered be the one written in vitals and lab values and the stubborn fact that, for now, I was still the kind of man who read what the numbers said, even when they hurt. The case didn't disappear when the sentence was handed down. It just changed shape, the way a wound becomes a scar you can trace with your fingers years later. At the trauma center, Mason's name came up less as a person and more as a cautionary tale, a shorthand in meetings when administrators talked about diversion and integrity. "We don't want another Rourke situation" became code for a dozen memos, new double sign-off protocols, surprise audits that made anesthesiologists grumble and nurses roll their eyes until they understood that inconvenience was the point. My name floated in those conversations too, just under the surface. "We have people like Hale now. They pay attention. Bitch," and every time I heard it, a part of me wanted to correct the record. I wasn't some incorruptible saint. I was a guy who'd gotten tired of pretending the numbers didn't spell out a story. Still, the label stuck. Integrity, whistleblower, watchdog. Titles I hadn't asked for became another layer of ID, like my badge number and my employee login. Once a month, sometimes more, I'd be asked to speak for 15 minutes at new staff orientation about recognizing irregularities. It was never framed as, "Tell us about the time your girlfriend's ex went to prison." It was slides about chain of custody, examples of inventory anomalies, anonymized graphs showing how diversion patterns hide in noise. I'd stand at the front of a too-bright conference room, point at lines on a chart, and explain how stolen meds aren't just missing pills. They're extra funerals, longer rehab stays, families who don't know why things went wrong. I never said Mason's name. I didn't have to. The story was written in the shapes of the curves. Occasionally, someone would catch me afterward in the hallway, eyes a little too sharp to be casual. "Hey, you were part of that big case in your last hospital, right?" Sometimes from a resident who'd read too many medical thrillers, sometimes from a nurse who'd heard half a rumor in a break room. I always gave the same answer. I reported what I saw. A lot of people did their jobs after that. It wasn't false humility. It was self-defense. The more you let yourself be the hero, the easier it becomes to believe your instincts are always right. And that's how people like Mason are born in the first place, convinced they see more clearly than everyone else, convinced that outcomes justify shortcuts. I didn't want that infection. Life outside the hospital rebuilt itself in slow, practical layers. I found an apartment with cheap rent and decent water pressure, bought furniture that didn't match on purpose, started going to the same diner after night shifts until the staff knew my order. I learned the new city's siren patterns, the way traffic bunched around the on-ramp at 6 a.m, the way the sky looked over the trauma bay entrance just before dawn. I went months at a time without thinking of the Christmas table where Mason had been arrested, until a certain holiday song or the smell of pine in a grocery store aisle snapped the memory back like a rubber band. I didn't date for a long time, not because I'd sworn off relationships in some dramatic vow, but because every time someone smiled at me across a bar or asked what I did for a living at a friend's party, my brain started running background checks it had no right to run. I'd catch myself mentally cataloging who they mentioned with a little too much reverence, whether they flinched at the word audit, whether they joked about gaming the system in a way that made my skin itch. Trust is hard to rebuild when you've watched someone use it as a shield for a crime. Eventually, though, the loneliness got louder than the fear. It didn't announce itself with violins. It sounded like too many quiet mornings off shift with no one to share the dumb details with. The weird complaint a patient made. The vending machine that ate my money again. The way a new attending liked to hum while suturing. Connection isn't built on grand confessions. It's built on reporting the minor weather of your life to someone who cares. The first person I let in, even a little, wasn't a romantic interest. It was a pharmacist named Lena who ran our trauma center's medroom like a general runs a supply line. She had a dry sense of humor and a zero-tolerance policy for sloppy documentation, and she'd survived her own version of a Mason once, years back, at a different hospital. One night, over bad coffee during a lull in the chaos, she said, "You know the thing nobody tells you about whistleblowing? Everyone talks about the big fall, but not about how weird it feels to go back to counting pills like nothing happened." I snorted. "Yeah. You start to feel like every narc box is a loaded question." She nodded. "And like every colleague is either a future ally or an unknowing liability." We didn't swap full stories. We traded outlines. Her surgeon, my surgeon, her friend who'd looked away, my ex who hadn't looked closely enough. There was comfort in that oblique honesty. Not trauma bonding exactly, more like disaster debriefing. Eventually, after enough of those midnight conversations, I realized I could talk about the case without Tessa's face being the first image that flashed in my mind. That didn't mean she'd vanished from the story. It meant her role had settled into its true scale, not the axis everything spun around, just one of many forces that shaped it. A year after Mason's sentencing, the trauma center asked if I'd be willing to co-author an anonymized case study for a national conference, Social Engineering and Diversion in High-Trust Clinical Settings. The title made it sound like a software talk. The content was messier. We wrote about how charismatic clinicians exploit gaps in protocol, how personal relationships get weaponized to steer suspicion, how staff with good instincts can be gaslit into doubting what logs clearly show. We included a section on emotional pressure points: guilt, loyalty, fear of being the problem. I pushed for that part. Numbers alone don't explain why people stay silent. Someone in the conference Q&A asked the question that always comes, in some form: how do you live with being the one who blew it up? I thought about my motel room that first night. The Christmas arrest, Tessa's voice cracking on the word because, the loss of a future that had felt solid until it collapsed in my hands. I thought about the patients whose charts I'd seen in the evidence vault. Their names blurred out, but their pain levels not. "You don't live with it like a burden," I said finally. "You live with it like gravity. It's just there." The alternative was pretending it wasn't. After the session, a nurse from another hospital caught me near the coffee urn and said, "My sister's boyfriend is a doctor who does things that don't feel right. She tells me not to make it a thing. Listening to you, I realized it's already a thing. She just doesn't want to look at it." She didn't ask what to do. She already knew. She just needed someone who'd been through the fire to confirm she wasn't crazy for smelling smoke. I went home that night and sat on my new couch, the one that didn't have Tessa's indentation on one side, and realized something that should have been obvious sooner. The story hadn't started with Christmas, and it hadn't ended with sentencing. It started the first time I ignored an oddity because it felt easier, and it would end, if it ever really ended, the last time I chose to pay attention even when it cost me. A week later, as December rolled around again and the hospital hung up the same tired decorations over the nurse's station, my charge nurse asked if I had any plans for Christmas. I glanced at the schedule. I was on nights, of course. "Just work," I said. "And maybe, if I'm feeling wild, a decent cup of coffee afterward." She grinned. "No big family drama? No ex showing up with surprises?" "Not this year," I said, and felt a surprising lightness in the truth. On my break at 3 a.m. Christmas morning, I sat in the quiet lab, watched a fresh set of tox panels run on the analyzer, and thought back to the question that had started it all, the one I'd asked myself that first long night. What do you do when the person you love tells you not to come so they can catch up with their past? A year later, I had my answer, stripped of heartbreak and theatrics. You read what the numbers say about who they really are. You tell the truth where it counts, and then you walk toward a life where Christmas is just a shift on the calendar, not a test of whether you're willing to disappear so someone else can stay comfortable. The second Christmas at the trauma center passed without incident, which felt like its own small miracle. No arrests, no warrants, no names I knew on the news, just the usual mix of bad timing and bad luck, car crashes, overdoses, heart attacks that didn't respect family calendars. The hospital breakroom TV played the same saccharine holiday movies on mute, while someone's Bluetooth speaker tried to drown them out with lo-fi beats. I took my break in the lab, as usual, where the only sound was the analyzer cycling and the hum of the refrigerator. It was peaceful in a way my therapist, yes, I finally got one, called functional stillness. She said I'd built my life around places where numbers tell the truth because people don't, and she wasn't wrong. I didn't argue. I just kept showing up to appointments, the same way I kept showing up to night shift, not because I loved the process, but because I liked what it kept from rotting. Somewhere in that second year, my reputation evolved from the whistleblower guy to the guy who's annoyingly good at seeing patterns. New residents would roll their eyes when I flagged weird repeat orders, then come back 3 months later and say, "Okay, I get it now." After a morbidity conference made some quiet near miss very loud. Lena started calling me Gravity when we were alone in the medroom. "You're the thing people don't think about until they drop something," she'd say, counting vials with her practiced flick and scan motion. I'd tell her she was mixing metaphors, she'd tell me to shut up and sign the sheet. I didn't talk about Tessa much, even to the therapist. Not because I was repressing, but because there's only so much analysis you can apply to a person before you stop seeing them and start seeing a case study. She'd made her choices under the worst possible influences. I'd made mine under the best possible information. Somewhere between those realities, a relationship had died. The court system had given her a kind of absolution the rest of her life wouldn't. No charges, no record, just job loss and late-night regrets. That felt proportional, if not satisfying. I didn't stalk her socials. I heard from Nia once that she'd moved into health IT, far from direct prescribing power, closer to the logs she'd once tried not to look at. "She reads audit trails now," Nia had said. "She says it's like penance." I'd told her it sounded more like growth than punishment. We left it there. One night, months later, a new nurse asked me, half joking, "So if someone wanted to fool you, what's the trick?" I could see the curiosity behind the joke, the part of her that wanted reassurance that the system was solid, that villains wore capes, or at least obvious smirks. I thought about Mason's steady hands, Tessa's sideways glances, my own hunger to be the calm one in every room. "They don't try to fool you," I said. "They get you to help them without realizing it. That's the trick. They borrow your story about who you are, good worker, loyal partner, team player, and use it against you." She frowned. "So, what do you do about that?" "Pay attention to the moments when your story and the logs don't match," I said, "and be willing to change the story." I heard how earnest it sounded and wanted to take it back, but she nodded slowly like I'd given her something she could actually use. Maybe I had. Maybe that was the quiet service this whole mess had pressed me into. Not martyrdom, just narrative correction. Helping people see that not making it a thing is sometimes the worst thing you can do. Every so often, my phone still lights up with unknown numbers I know better than to answer. Reporters chasing "where are they now" angles, legal assistants looking for context on other cases, strangers who somehow think I'm a hotline for their suspicions. I don't pick up. I'm not a symbol. I'm a guy who reads numbers, signs forms, asks annoying questions, and goes home to a small apartment that finally feels like mine, not like a stage between someone else's scenes. On my nights off, I've started leaving the apartment more. Movies, bookstores, the occasional awkward first date that doesn't devolve into an interrogation about my past. I don't lead with the story. If it comes up, I offer the shortest version that's still true. I worked a case once that taught me I'd rather lose a relationship than lose my ability to believe the data. The right kind of person hears that and doesn't flinch. The wrong kind argues. That's a filter I trust more than any app. If there's a lesson in all of this, it's not that you should report every odd thing like it's a crime conspiracy, or that love is always a liability, or that you can logic your way out of heartbreak. It's simpler and harder. Some days, the bravest thing you can do is refuse to edit the story to protect someone who's counting on your silence. And some nights, the bravest thing is quieter still. Running the test exactly by the book, signing your name in the right box, and walking away from the phone when "I'm sorry" pings your screen from a past you've already audited. On this Christmas, I clock in, I draw blood, I spin samples, I read the results. When my break comes, I stand at the lab window with bad coffee, watch snow smear itself across the sodium vapor glow of the parking lot, and feel something I didn't expect to feel again around this time of year. Not guilt, not triumph, just the steady, ordinary weight of a life I'm not lying to myself about anymore.